In this episode of American Greed, they said it was the deal of a lifetime.
Put money in God's hand, and God gives it back to you double.
And thousands of people put their faith and money into the ministry.
They said, we'll double your money in 17 months. That was the pitch.
But it was a fraud, and all in the name of God.
I've seen more money.
He was one of the most successful jewel thieves of all time.
I could make $1 million one night and start looking for another one the next day.
Bill Mason made it look easy, hobnobbing with the rich and famous and taking their diamonds.
Bill had no desire to rob celebrities. But as Willie Sutton once said about robbing, why did you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is.
Through it all, yeah. Through it all.
Every time it's the same routine.
Woo! Somebody say hallelujah.
Singing, praying.
And Lord, we just offer up ourselves as a living sacrifice.
God is real.
But then comes the sales pitch.
God never intended for his church to be poor. He said, blessed are the poor in heart, not pocketbook.
Most of you get blessed. How many are in the faith promise plan already?
Gerald Payne, seen here, is the founder of a church called Greater Ministries International.
He was a blue-collar guy. He was a painter.
Payne is an ex-con, but in the late 80s, he changed his ways and found God. He bought an old bank building in Tampa and started Greater Ministries International.
He did have a friend in Don Hall who certainly knew Scripture and was able to put together this sort of team that made a very compelling pitch to people.
Throughout the 90s, Payne and his fellow ministers traveled the country, spreading...
It's just as simple as this. Put money in God's hand, and God gives it back to you double.
Payne's brainchild is an unorthodox money doubling program, ultimately called Faith Promises. The plan is simple. Gift the church, and that money will be doubled within 17 months.
The story he told most of the time on the road was that he was awakened one night by God. That you don't think I meant that just for back then. You can use this today.
Through divine inspiration, Payne says God has given him a plan.
God said this plan will be around until he comes again. Praise God. Hallelujah.
And the secret is in the Bible.
And Gerald took this passage of Luke, which was mostly about compassion and forgiveness, and applied that financially.
I'll be given to you.
In city after city, Payne and his ministers pitch their program and collect millions of dollars.
So if you want to start receiving, then start giving.
They would urge people, max out your credit cards, get a new mortgage on your house. Don't worry about 18% interest. We're giving you 100%. And pointing to all of their friends and family who were in the audience who received those envelopes full of cash every month.
You have a lot of folks realizing now, after they put the $250 in and it doubled to $500, they put it in and went to $1,000, put it in and went to $2,000, put it in and went to $4,000.
And tens of thousands of people jump in, handing over their hard-earned cash.
This is my favorite picture of you.
People like Mary Coy and Nancy Ross, who have been friends for more than 3 decades.
I think it was in 1974 when I came to became my best friend.
It's a friendship that is firmly rooted in faith.
It is. It is our life, I think. Not religion, but our faith and belief in God.
In 1996, Nancy Ross is hoping to raise money for a charity when a stockbroker recommends investing in Greater Ministries. She hopes it is the answer to her prayers.
And he fully convinced me out of the stock and put it into Greater Ministries.
Nancy learns that the church is making a killing in diamond mines and offshore investments.
And I believe there was a diamond mine in Africa, but they were all offshore gem investments. So I went into it full bore.
Nancy cleans out her savings and hands over
1/8 of the month. We'd go to this house and we'd pick up cash, whatever we wanted.
With the money rolling in, Nancy encourages Mary to get in on the action.
They had scripture that they used to back up what they were doing, and we knew that they were feeding the poor and housing the homeless.
We got 1,500 children in one home over in Haiti, and we've got 1,400.
Between a message from the pulpit based in Scripture with seeing everyone around you getting paid. And that becomes a little difficult to resist. You drop a lot of your defenses when all your friends and family can show you the envelopes full of cash.
This is a form that was used when we first got involved as to...
Coy mortgages her house and hands over
a huge amount, because I had been a single mother for years.
Immediately, the cash comes in.
Every month I would go and could pick up several $1,000s in cash. I mean, that was just boggled my mind that I would be given cash.
And like that, the word spreads.
And you kind of trust people in your own church.
Audrey Wharton hears about...
Anytime you can make money and put a contribution or a donation or in any way help the religious mission field, that's what Christians are called to do. So it was almost a win-win.
Audrey and her husband David buy in.
This one's $50,500. This says $25,000. Yeah.
They send in and pays.
Was right on time, right on schedule. No reason to question it.
By the late 90s, Greater Ministries is pulling in cash from people all across the country.
We heard about vaults full of cash. It was a bank building, and there were at least 2 vaults. And that when the money would come in every month, it would literally fill the floor. You would sort of wade through this room full of bills.
And just wads of cash, and all in the name of God. It seems almost too good to be true. Turns out, it was.
I just thought, well, it sounds good. And maybe this one really is good. Even though it looks too good to be true, maybe this time it is. But I was wrong.
You folks have got a lot invested into God's kingdom.
Gerald Payne is a preacher in a league of his own.
How many of you realize you are blessed people? Amen. Amen. Hallelujah. Give God the glory.
He runs a church out of an old bank building and travels the country touting a money doubling process is pulling in millions of dollars every month.
There was something, at a very minimum, very suspicious going on.
But a church with that kind of cash flow catches the attention of the IRS.
Yes, over a period of 2 years, they withdrew approximately $9 million from various banks in the Tampa Bay area.
Special Agent Angelo Troncoso digs into Greater Ministries' banking records and discovers...
shows that there was a cash out of $18,000. Why a church would need that volume of cash to run its operations was a red flag for me.
Troncoso suspects Greater Ministries is up to no good and takes his suspicions to U.S. Attorney Bob Mosikowski.
We found they were bringing in an awful lot of money.
So where is the money coming from? Investments in diamond mines, gold mines, and offshore trading.
What we do is take the monies that you give and we ship it overseas. We do what we call world trades with world banks. And we make 30 to 40% return on our money each trade.
Records indicate that Greater Ministries poured millions into the African nation of Liberia, buying heavy machinery and land.
Position a gold mine here for you.
Amen.
But investigators don't buy those claims.
These things don't exist. They talked about their lucrative mining operations in Africa and other places. They tried to make those things real. They never took a dime out of the ground.
No matter how much we looked, we couldn't find any income-generating activity other than more investors' site.
Angelo Troncoso believes it is all a facade, that there are no gold mines or overseas trades, just millions and millions of dollars of cash trading hands.
It was predominantly a fraud.
Oh, by the 6, 7 months into the investigation, I was certain that it was a Ponzi scheme.
In a Ponzi scheme, money from new investors is used to pay out old investors.
Activities, bringing in investors' money, and then paying the earlier investors off with money coming in from the later investors.
The program collapses when there aren't enough new investors to keep it afloat.
You have to keep expanding the investor base, or once that dries up, people are going to lose their money. While
Troncoso and Mosikowski build their case, church lead fire.
I'm going to head on down towards downtown.
Making its way to Bill Smith in Birmingham, Alabama.
Of course, being in the Bible Belt, Birmingham in particular has been a very spiritual city. I had heard about Greater Tampa Ministries for 6 or 7 years. And so I thought, well, we ought to look into it, see what they're really doing.
2 years of statements.
He said that Greater Ministries had allowed him to set up trust college funds for his grandchildren, and that he was getting a 5% return on his money every month.
Like so many before him, Smith buys into the dream.
They would send me paperwork every month showing, what it had grown to. And I would put different...
Sends nearly $80,000. But after 4 months, his faith will be put to the test.
And I thought, no, this is not right. Something's wrong.
In July 1998, regulators shut down Best Bank in Boulder, Colorado. With the bank's collapse, Greater Ministries loses $20 million in uninsured deposits. And with that...
Just have to wonder, well, Lord, what really is happening?
3 months later, the cash stops flowing.
So they lose about $20 million there. And there's, from that day forward in July of 1998, this sort of desperate search for new money so they can continue to pay out the old investors.
And I ask that you get in the plan and get in it with great gusto.
If you get... In lieu of cash, some investors receive promissory notes.
One of the things they did was to give us these Greater Trust non-transferable certificates, which was supposed to have been redeemed in gold, as I recall.
Yes.
Gold bars or something.
Greater Ministries tells investors to hold on and keep the faith. But many start to wonder if they've been...
Money. I have a house payment. Uh-oh. What now? We'll just have to trust in the Lord, and... Well, I was hanging on with my fingernails, trusting in the Lord, but the money wasn't coming.
When American greed returns, could the investor's faith pay off? And later, a master jewel thief tells all.
I've had the boxes from the Greater Ministry case brought up and put in here, and you can see there are about 80 of them.
Tom Krebs is an Alabama attorney and former securities regulator.
What's mostly said is that these files represent, broken dreams. That's what makes me mad. These are the depositions.
Case against Greater Ministries after an investor named Bill Smith suspects he has been defrauded.
I can find one here.
Krebs discovers that Bill Smith is not alone.
These are names of people who were victimized in the state of Georgia. And we've just got the computer printouts on the lists of victims, and they're just thousands, tens of thousands of them. Main thing was shutting them down.
Yeah, that's right.
Ponzi scheme under the cloak of religion for 8 years. And now the money is running out, and investors like Smith are about to pay the price.
Well, these people know them as thieves. It was a scam that was particularly successful amongst a targeted group of people who wanted to believe it. And they were the sheep ready for shearing.
The religious fraud is probably the most insidious.
Securities Commission.
I've seen more money stolen in the name of God than any other way. It's the worst form of con artistry that you can imagine.
Yea, when the world is in chaos.
Borg says religious scams are so pervasive because the message comes from the pulpit.
But think about ministers and those that are in the religious order. These are the folks you look up to and trust.
Krebs and Borg
gathering as much information as we can, tons of bank records, trying to figure out where money was going, verifying that no, the church didn't own any cargo ships. They weren't engaged in foreign currency transaction, and we found no evidence of gold or silver or, mines in Africa.
The pair concludes it was all a sham.
The only source of the revenues was from the investors.
But in left hand to the right hand, to the next left hand, to the next right hand.
But for 8 years, Greater Ministries gets away with it because they argue that the cash was a gift to the church and not an investment.
But people forget that these are investments, and they are looking to get something back. This is not a gift. Call it what you will, but if you're promised double your money in 17 months, you're getting a payment back.
Gerald Payne doesn't have.
They were breaking securities laws in my state.
The securities had to be licensed, and the persons who sold them had to be licensed.
As Alabama authorities build their civil case, IRS agent Angelo Troncoso is closing in on Greater Ministries back in Tampa. After a 4-year investigation, a grand jury hands down a 20-count indictment charging Gerald Payne and 6 church elders.
This is the residence of Gerald Payne, where we're
On March 12, 1999, Angelo Troncoso moves in on Payne and his wife Betty as they leave their house.
They were arrested on that driveway. There was intelligence that we had that Mr. Payne always carried a weapon in his car and a weapon in his boot. We found no weapon on Mr. Payne. We found no weapon in the car. We did, however, find...
The church leaders are cuffed and booked, and word travels quickly to Barbara Catay, the legal advisor for Greater Ministries.
You can't raise that kind of money without the government sticking their nose into it.
Catay says the government's case is weak at best.
I say talk's cheap. Show me your proof, because I can prove otherwise. It's just like the Daisy scheme. It wasn't. Gerald Payne made his money by doing international trades.
Catay heads to jail and bonds out the church leaders. Almost immediately, they're back at it, urging people to hand over their money despite a pending criminal trial.
So we're going on our 8th year now. We don't know if anybody's lost a dollar in our program, okay? Because it's not ours, it's God's.
The deal was, we're a religious organization. We can do whatever it is we want to do.
I have nothing to hide. We're not doing anything wrong. But the Bible says, cast not your pearl before swine.
That's right.
And they knew the end was near, and they continued to take people's money at that point because somehow they thought the rules didn't count.
We saw it expanding. They were pulling 18 million to 16 million down a month in order to protect the people who were being defrauded.
A federal indictment isn't enough to stop Gerald Payne. Krebs and Borg decide they need to shut Greater Ministries down before more investors are fleeced.
We actually convinced a federal judge that we needed to stop the hemorrhaging. And he gave us the injunctions necessary to take control of that building and those records.
But this came after the Waco.
They were concerned because it was a bank building, and there was suspicion that these folks were armed.
The U.S. Marshals call in reinforcements. Around 7 p.m., an arsenal rolls down Byrd Street, and investigators storm Greater Ministries.
So they stormed it basically with a SWAT team and a tank. So it was a fairly dramatic entry.
The team makes its way inside Greater Ministry and a stash of weapons, postal boxes full of letters to investors, and a tape library documenting more than 100 meetings. Altogether, it is an operation much larger than investigators had anticipated.
Well, we ultimately found about $450 million taken from people from all over this country. The amazing thing to me today, still, and $15 million in September of '97.
Investigators find cash stashed throughout the building.
I, for example, opened a secretary's desk, pulled it open, and there was about $14,000 in cash, $100 bills, tied up in a bundle in a little bag.
But when they crack open the vaults, investigators discover that most of the money is gone. $1,112,000 in total. Internal records detail where much of the money went, including millions of dollars in kickbacks paid to insiders listed in the files as gas money.
It is money to you for having brought people into the Faith Promise Plan. It's a commission.
A 5% commission that adds up to more than $20 million.
There's some people here who were pulling commissions. The board of directors were getting paid huge amounts of money.
And a lot of money was squandered in bad investments.
To put it quite frankly, the con men came out of the woodwork, trying to solicit funds from Gerald Payne to invest in every scam imaginable.
Greater Ministries lost $20 million in the Best Bank collapse, and more than $12 million
exempt from being conned,
No jewelry.
And when the cash began to run out, Greater Ministries was trying to issue bonds and sell gold coins and jewelry, anything to keep the money flowing.
These are greater trust in God bonds, guaranteed by God if you listen to them. Now, these are $100 and $500, $1,000. all the way up to 50. We found where they had been selling gold coins and gold rings, the Greater Trust in God logo on the back.
For weeks, investigators sift through the wreckage until they uncover a set of documents, a possible escape plan.
This is a package of documents that we found inside the building dealing with their attempt to buy an island and make it their own sovereign country.
Video obtained by American Greed shows church leaders scouting an island off the coast of Honduras, just days after the indictment was handed down.
They wanted to create what they called the ecclesiastical domain, similar to the Vatican, its own freestanding state. Here are the things they would need. They'd need some jeeps. They'd need some fuel tanks.
A 22-page plan details the setup and operations of the land.
You order import Filipinos, as you see right here.
30 Filipinos would be needed to staff the island.
That was going to be their labor pool. They were going to import Filipino laborers to help them build all this so they could have places to live.
And then there is the security detail.
The most disturbing part was this security registry that they had. 10 M16 rifles, 10 9mm machine rifles with scopes, 10 night vision helmets.
Investigators suspect Gerald Payne was trying to flee before the scheme came crashing down. But now, he isn't going anywhere. When American Greed returns, will Payne's next sermon be in federal prison? For more information and special web exclusives, log on to americangreed.cnbc.com.
Tonight, what some are calling a fleecing of America that's...
By 1999, the demise of Greater Ministries International is making news around the nation.
They invested on faith in a house of worship by a man who claims to have God on his side.
The church pulled in hundreds of millions of dollars from people who shut it down.
That was the end of Greater Ministries, no question about that. We shut it at that point.
It's news that is hard to take for many who believe in Gerald Payne.
We weren't the most popular people in that community for a while. At that time, they still believed the program.
Outside the headquarters, crowds protest and pray.
I remember looking out the window and somebody raising his fist.
Investigators can prove it was all a fraud and continue to uncover evidence of heartbreaking losses.
These are letters from victims to Greater Ministries. It says, I gifted twice in 1998, $20,500. And it so happens it was for me everything I had. I'm 74 years old. I don't have rent money or a place to live or food money. Place in hell. One close to the hottest fire. They destroy dreams. They destroy lives. And remember, they did it in the name of God.
In January of 2001, Gerald Payne and 4 church elders stand trial.
Well, we're basically telling them it was a Ponzi scheme, that they took in lots of investors' money. They made a lot of false promises.
But according to the defense, there was no fraud because the money was a gift and not an investment.
You see, this was a gifting program. You signed a form when you became a member of Greater Ministries that any money you gave was a gift. You had no expectations of a return except how the Lord provided.
Up to everybody, no, we were looking to get our, twice our money back, as promised by God and the church.
And perhaps the best evidence came from Greater Ministries recordings.
And they videotaped every meeting they had. It was great evidence. I mean, we did not have to worry about proving what it is they told people in order to induce them to give their money. It was very clear. You're getting double.
After 7 weeks of trial, the verdict is in. Guilty. At sentencing, Gerald Payne receives 27 years behind bars. His co-defendants receive sentences ranging from 11 years to 20 years. Gerald Payne now serves his time in a federal prison in Minnesota. He has suffered 5 strokes and is in poor health. But in a phone interview, he told American Greed
to help all Christians. We did nothing wrong, and we were relying on the deity of God to pay people back. We did a good job of it for 9 or 9.5 years.
But that's not enough for the victims who gave to the church and lost so much.
Put in $79,850.
Around $150,000.
About 66.
Scam.
And when the dust settles, investors are left to pick up the pieces.
My seed money for the future was gone, and that's what was so heartbreaking. I had to start from scratch.
Mary Coy and Nancy Ross are both forced out of retirement to go back to work.
I began working at Wycliffe Bible Translators. At that time, I
lost her son's college fund.
All of his college fund, which would have given him plenty of education money for whatever he needed to do. But we lost it, and there was not a thing we can do.
Greater Ministries wasn't the first scam cloaked in religion, and it certainly won't be the last.
Because wherever the money's around, you're going to have thieves. You know, if it's too good to be true, it is. Whoever says that you're going to double your money.
For these victims, their lives will forever be altered. But one thing remains unchanged, their faith.
God will take care of that, and he's seen that we get through most everything, so we just keep believing.
I've only become stronger, so it has not destroyed my faith at all.
I think this has been the testing that has brought a deeper faith, a deeper understanding. And so,
up next on American Greed,
Bill may have been the most successful jewel thief ever.
I loved the thrill of it. I loved the adrenaline rush.
He robbed the rich and famous.
He was driven to do this. This was in his blood. He literally got high off of what he did.
It's after midnight on Florida's Gold Coast. 15 stories above the beach, a man clings to the side of a building, walking along the ledge.
I was standing, and I shimmied along, holding on to the back of the ledge as best I could.
Why is this man risking his life? He knows that if he can make it to the balcony at the end of the ledge...
That's where all the jewels were. They are now elsewhere.
His name is Bill Mason. After a life in the shadows, he's now come clean as one of the world's most successful jewel thieves. With little more than a rope and nerves of steel, the cat burglar took in more than $10 million worth of jewels.
I loved the thrill of it. I loved the adrenaline. I could make $1 million one night and start looking for another one the next day.
His targets are like a Hollywood's who's who.
Bill had no desire to rob celebrities.
Lee Gruenfeld co-wrote Mason's autobiography.
But as Willie Sutton once said about robbing, why did you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is.
As Mason sees it, greed runs the jewels through a respected jeweler who knew exactly what Mason was up to.
Oh, yeah, he knew what was up. I mean, he was, yes, he definitely knew what was up. And, we could work out a pretty good price.
Bill Mason says he has gone straight, and he wants to teach others not to be lulled into a false sense of security.
Everybody gets complacent. A lot of times, I like patios, and people leave them open all the time. People don't think that anybody can get up there, so, they're just careless. These are some of the buildings that we used to manage here.
In Cleveland, Ohio, where the story begins, Mason lives a double life. By night, a jewel thief. By day, an apartment manager.
This was my day job. And in Florida, I had it about people's security thoughts. I learned a lot about locks. I learned about buildings and how they work and how cameras work.
All the while, Mason is secretly on the lookout for new victims.
It's easy to pick probably 10 prospects out of this page here. I mean, this woman's got a $200,000 necklace on.
We were in Palm Beach once, and they were about who you think is worth going after. And there were all these, women with just fabulous jewels. And then there was this gorgeous woman with one elegant strand of pearls. She was about, 22 or 23, and she was with a guy who was about 130 years old. And I picked everybody else, and Bill said, that's the one you want. I said, why? He says, because do you think that she's with him for love? This begins to only wear a little bit. While she's out at this party, I guarantee you there's $500,000 worth of stuff back at home. And that's the way he thought.
This kind of prospecting leads Mason to his first big score.
She was on Mike Douglas in Cleveland years and years ago, and she just had tons of jewelry on.
She is the comedian Phyllis Diller.
Take big. I had a 90-carat star sapphire ring. That's a biggie. And then I had a lot of big rings. I love big rings.
After a gig in Cleveland, Miss Diller goes back to her hotel room. She turns on the lights and sees that all her jewels are gone.
It was diamonds. And I made it so easy. How dumb this is. In a cheap motel, in a top drawer, on a towel, all lying there. We're talking Robbie Dumb-E.
The heist is big news in Cleveland, and the pressure is on police to find the thief. But the trail quickly grows cold.
They never could figure out.
Bill Mason is willing to talk about it.
Well, I hung up on the other building's roof and watched through binoculars, trying to see some movement through the curtains.
Miss Diller is staying in a motel. Mason simply rappels down the roof onto her balcony. To Mason's surprise, the patio door is open.
I was in and out of there about 5 minutes walked out the front door.
That was probably the thing I missed the most.
But unfortunately, it was a Cartier watch, and the only thing I could do was melt down the back. Took the back off, got a new back, and melt down the back, and then sold it from there.
It was easy, and Mason was hooked. When we return, his... For cat burglar Bill Mason, the high-rises of South Florida are giant jewel boxes waiting to be pried open.
The building behind me is where Arm & Hammer lived on the 15th.
His girlfriend's diamonds. So he decides to do what's worked for him in the past, getting in through the back door.
I wanted to go in through the balcony because I assumed the locks were locked on the front door and the alarms were set.
But how can he get to the balcony? The answer comes to him in a flash. A ledge runs all around the building.
It's the green one up there.
And it connects hammers and has no alarm and a cheap lock, which Mason easily picks open. The apartment is now Mason's base of operations.
I came out of the 15th floor unit facing south and walked around the ledge over to the patio. There was no safety precautions I could take, really, because there wasn't anything to hang on to. I just sort of hung onto the wall as best I could.
Smiles upon him.
It was a great relief. And it was even a greater relief when I found the door open.
The patio door is unlocked and open a crack. Mason walks in and makes his way to the master bedroom.
Almost everybody leaves them in their bedroom. I figure there might be a safe in there or something, some kind of security. But, when you see that many jewels, in a box, a jewelry box. Walked out the front door, walked down the driveway, and down the beach.
Mason is made off with an estimated $600,000 in jewels, and the police have no suspects. Mason thinks he's gotten away scot-free, but he's wrong. A short time later, Mason is caught casing a Fort Lauderdale hotel.
They pounced.
Attorney.
And, of course, he had this large set of keys and burglary tools with him, not just the master keys, but he had some pliers and he had some screwdrivers and several other things that normally a guy walking around in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt is not going to carry if he's on his day to the beach.
They came over and searched my house, and they found $40,000 worth of jewelry, stolen jewelry, in the house.
At the time, police think the police just want to know where Mason got the jewels.
He said, now, if you tell us where the jewels came from, we'll give you immunity.
They wanted to clean their books up and at least be able to say, well, this is who did that burglary, and not have another suspect necessarily on their table.
Mason can hardly believe his luck.
So I got it in writing, and I thought, boy.
Police, and begins to point out his heists.
And I think by the time he finished, there were dozens, maybe more than dozens of locations which Bill had pointed out, and he was immunized. He had what was known as transactional immunity, could not be prosecuted.
And I ran a list off on him, about 13 jobs, and they about had a coronary.
The list of jobs for which Mason has played his cards well. He's sentenced to a mere 90 days in county jail and 7 years of probation.
I did 90 days in jail. I did 77 of the 90 days.
Mason gets off easy, that a tiger can't change his stripes. 2 years later, he's picked up on suspicion of another burglary. Now he's looking at several years in prison. This time, on the eve of trial,
I was just fed up. I was fighting with my wife all the time, and I just had it, and it sounded like a good idea at the time. I thought I'd move up to someplace and bring my family along, and we'd start a new life. Well, it doesn't quite work like that.
He was a federal fugitive.
For 5 years, Mason is on the run, until he runs
up some informant information that Bill Mason was in Cleveland.
Mason is ratted out. A tipster says exactly where he is, and the cops catch up with Mason at Cleveland's airport.
So that's how we physically arrested him, cornered, and with plenty of manpower.
Mason pleads guilty to 1 count of grand larceny, and is sentenced considering all the people Bill Mason victimized. But Mason feels his is a cautionary tale.
If I'd have stayed on with the real estate business and buying buildings like I was, I probably have a couple hundred units now, bringing in a tremendous amount of money. I wouldn't have lost my first wife. I wouldn't have spent 3 years in the joint, plus spent a lot of money on lawyers and so on and so forth. Content guy, I guess.
Very little of the stolen loot is returned to victims. The lion's share of the jewelry was broken apart into loose stones and fenced through jewelers in New York and Cleveland. To potential victims, the jewel thief says, "You're not as safe as you think."
If you're going to flaunt a lot of jewelry, somebody's going to see you after a while. And, maybe they won't be as nuts as...
As for Mason's victims, one of his most famous now has second thoughts about investing too much money in jewels.
I've learned about money recently, just recently, like yesterday. Like, in other words, put your money where it makes money, not where it's back in the drawer waiting for Bill Mason.
That allowed predators like Kim Merritt to download entire lives from unsecured computers. Agent Danya Davis and Kirsten Gregg of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation found themselves in the desolate plains outside Denver, approaching a rusted RV. Inside, they found Kim Merritt surrounded by the same toxic mixture that had fueled the Schreckingus ring, stacks of stolen credit documents, and a crack pipe. "It's the drugs," Kim whispered as she was handcuffed. "The drugs make me do it." It was a refrain the investigators had heard 1,000 times. The addiction creates the need, and the identity that precious commodity, as victim Anita Jans called it, provides the means. From the high-tech offices of ID Watchdog to the undercover fire inspectors like Jim Stickley, who break into banks to show them how easy it is to steal their data, the battle continues. Greed doesn't change. It only changes its mask. Whether it's a forged check in a meth head's hand, a tactical hood in a Wheaton bank, or a doctor's fraudulent ledger, the mirror remains the same. It reflects a world where your name is the most valuable thing you own and the easiest thing to lose. Epilogue: the cost of the cloud. As the sun sets over the Rockies, the lights of the city flicker on millions of identities, millions of lives, all stored in the digital ether. Somewhere, a red flag is being raised on a mailbox. Somewhere, a printer is humming, and somewhere, a detective is banging on a door. The war on identity theft is never won, it is only fought. One name, one check, and one ghost at a time. Author's note: this narrative was reconstructed based on the investigative files of the American Greed series. All events described are based on documented testimony. This installment expands on the previous narrative, introducing the medical fraud arc and deepening the technical details of the criminal operations. Note: the requested model Gemini-3-Pro-Image-Preview-11-20-5 is currently unavailable. This response and its structure were generated using the fallback model Gemini-5-Flash-Image-Preview, taken on Faith, the Shadow of the Steeple. Prologue: the mirage in the valley. The heat in Phoenix doesn't just sit on you, it interrogates you. In the summer of 1982, the sun hung over the valley of the sun like a divine eye, unblinking and judgmental. The air shimmered with a dry, metallic intensity that turned the asphalt into liquid and the horizon into a wavering promise of water that never existed. This was the Sonora Desert's cruelest trick, the mirage. It promised life where there was only dust, coolness where there was only fire. But for Bill Krotz, the heat was merely energy waiting to be harnessed. A 34-year-old attorney with a smile that felt like a warm Sunday morning and eyes that calculated with the precision of a mainframe computer. Krotz didn't see a wasteland. Standing on the parched earth of a burgeoning metropolis, he saw a landscape of divine opportunity. He saw skyrises of glass and steel reflecting the eternal blue of the Arizona sky. He saw sprawling retirement communities where the faithful could spend their golden years in the glow of righteousness. As he took the reins of the Baptist Foundation of Arizona BFA, a humble nonprofit intended to fund local ministries, he didn't see a small-scale charity. He saw a magnificent money machine for God. He believed he had been chosen not just by a board of directors, but by a higher calling to prove that faith and finance were not mutually exclusive, but rather two sides of the same golden coin. He would build an empire on the bedrock of belief, a monument to prosperity that would fund 1,000 missions. But in the desert, the most stable foundations can be built on shifting sand if the architect is blinded by his own reflection. Bill Krotz was a man who loved what he saw in the glassless savior in a suit, a prophet of the profit margin. He didn't realize that when you build a temple of smoke, the first gust of truth will bring it all down. Part 1, The Desert Prophet. Chapter 1, The Gospel of Stewardship. The living room of Bill and Pat Anderson's home was filled with the soft scent of lavender and the persistent, rattling hum of an aging air conditioner fighting a losing battle against the 110-degree afternoon. Bill Anderson, a man whose hands were mapped with the calluses and scars of 40 years as a plant manager, wiped a bead of sweat from his temple. He looked at Pat, sitting in her favorite floral armchair. Her face still held a trace of the fragility that had followed her life-threatening brain aneurysm 3 years prior. That medical crisis had been their wake-up call. It had stripped away their sense of invincibility, leaving them searching for something more permanent than a pension plan or a Social Security check. They wanted their final years to count for something eternal. They had found that permanence at the Southern Baptist Church. It wasn't just the soaring hymns that vibrated in their chests or the familiar, dust-sweet comfort of the King James Bible. It was the feeling of being part of a community where every life and every penny mattered for the kingdom. It's about stewardship, Bill. The man sitting across from them said. His name was Miller, a lead salesman for the BFA. He didn't look like a corporate shark. He looked like a man you'd trust to hold your child at a baptism. He wore a modest off-the-rack suit, a sincere expression, and held a Bible in his lap as if it were a legal brief. On the coffee table, he spread out glossy brochures that spoke of investing in the kingdom. In Matthew 25, we are told the parable of the talents, Miller said, his voice dropping to a rhythmic, soothing cadence. The master didn't want his servants to just hide the money in the dirt. He wanted them to multiply it for his return. That is what the foundation does. We take the resources God has blessed you with and we put them to work. We build low-income housing for the needy. We fund senior centers where the elderly aren't forgotten. We provide for the hungry. You're building your retirement. Yes, but you're also building the house of the Lord. It's wise stewardship in action. Bill Anderson leaned forward, his eyes tracking the numbers on the glossy paper. The bank is only offering 6% on our CDs. You're saying the BFA can give us 10%, guaranteed by the strength of our real estate holdings, Miller said with a reassuring nod. But it's more than just the interest, Bill. When you put your money in a secular bank, it might go to fund casinos, liquor stores, or things that don't honor the Lord. But with us, your money is sanctified. It furthers the Lord's work. Bill Krotz, our president, is a man of deep prayer. He treats every dollar as if it were the widow's mite. Pat's hand rested on Bill's arm, her fingers trembling slightly. Is it safe, Mr. Miller? Everything we have is in that nest egg. We need it for my medical checkups, and we've got $60. Zero set aside for our daughter's education. She's starting her senior year soon. Miller reached out and patted Pat's hand with fatherly warmth. Ma'am, we've been in operation since 1948. In all those years, through recessions and wars, we've never lost a penny of an investor's principal. Not one. We are audited every single year by Arthur Andersen, one of the largest, most prestigious accounting firms in the world. If they say our books are clean, you can rest easy. But more importantly, we answer to a higher authority. We are family here. In that moment, the deal was sealed. The Andersons transferred $200,000, their entire life savings, the fruit of 40 years of sweat and overtime, into the BFA. They felt a profound sense of peace, believing they had finally secured their future while serving their God. They didn't know they were walking into a temple where the priests were secretly burning the offerings to stay warm. Chapter 2. The Prophet in the Skyrise. The headquarters of the Baptist Foundation of Arizona occupied a prestigious floor in a Phoenix high-rise, a temple of glass that looked down upon the valley like a watchtower. Inside, the carpet was plush, the wood was cherry, and Christian music played softly in the lobby. Every board meeting began with a lengthy prayer for divine guidance in the marketplace. Bill Krotz sat behind a massive mahogany desk. At 34, he was already a legend in the Southern Baptist Convention. He was a financial wizard who spoke with the fire of a revivalist. When he walked into a church, the atmosphere changed. People stood up. They didn't just see an attorney, they saw a man who had cracked the code of prosperity. The growth is spectacular, Tom, Krotz said, looking up as his right-hand man, Tom Grabinski, entered the office. Grabinski, the foundation's in-house counsel, was the pragmatist to Krotz's visionary. He was a man who understood the fine print of the law and the even finer print of moral compromise. He closed the heavy door behind him, his face etched with worry. The growth is also our greatest danger, Bill. We're bringing in millions in new investments every month, but the Arizona real estate market is starting to look like a dry well. The bubble is hissing. We're losing air on our commercial projects. The late 1980s had been brutal to the desert. The raw land the BFA had purchased, thousands of acres of scrubland and undeveloped lots, was plummeting in value. The assets on the books were becoming liabilities. I won't hear it, Tom, Krotz said, standing up and walking to the floor-to-ceiling window. We are the Baptist Foundation. We are the economic engine of the convention. If we admit we've lost money, the churches will panic. The missions will fail. The schools will close. We have a sacred responsibility to keep the light burning, no matter the cost. The light is expensive, Grabinski countered. We owe 10% interest to thousands of people who expect their checks on the 1st of every month. Our properties aren't generating enough cash to cover the interest, let alone the principal. We're underwater on half our portfolio. Krotz turned, his face illuminated by the harsh Arizona sun. His eyes were cold, determined, the eyes of a man who believed his own press. Then we create a buffer. We need a way to move the losses off our books. Something independent. Something off the record. We'll call it Arizona Land Office. Alo. This was the birth of the bad bank. On paper, Alo was an independent company. In reality, it was a corporate shadow designed to absorb the BFAS failures. When a piece of land lost $5 million in value, the BFA would sell it to Allah for its original price or even more. Allah wouldn't pay in cash, it had none. Instead, it would issue a note receivable, a promise to pay later, to the outside world and to the auditors who didn't look too closely. The BFA appeared to be making massive profits on real estate sales. In reality, it was just moving debt from one pocket to another, creating a circular flow of money that kept the illusion alive. Is it legal? Grabinski asked, his voice a whisper. Krotz smiled. It's stewardship. Tom, we are protecting the flock from a temporary storm. When the market recovers, and it will, everyone will be made whole. We just need to keep all the balls in the air until then. The Lord provides. But sometimes he needs us to manage the optics. Chapter 3, The Skeptic in the Pews. Kyle Tresh arrived in Phoenix in the mid-90s with a heart full of idealism and a law degree he wanted to use for good. The son of a preacher from Oklahoma, Kyle had grown up in the shadow of the steeple. Joining the BFA felt like a divine appointment, a way to combine his professional skills with his personal faith. The morale was incredible. Kyle would later say in his depositions, everyone was happy. Everyone was praying. It felt like we were the good guys, the financial arm of a holy mission. But Kyle was a man of the law, and he appreciated the cold, hard logic of a ledger. As he began to review the transaction files for the real estate projects he was assigned to manage, his brow began to furrow. The BFAS ledgers were anything but logical. He noticed a recurring pattern: properties purchased for $2 million, then sold 6 months later to Allah for $5 million. No appraisals, no independent buyers, no logic. Just the BFA selling to itself. He spent nights in the office after everyone else had gone home, the only light coming from his desk lamp. He discovered that Allah was essentially a shell company with a negative net worth of over $100 million. It was a black hole in the middle of a Christian foundation. They're lying, Kyle whispered to the empty, quiet office one night. They're using new money from people like the Andersons to pay the interest to the old investors. It's a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a cross. The realization was a physical weight. In April 1996, Kyle and for other staff accountants did the unthinkable. They confronted the prophet. The meeting in the boardroom was freezing. Krotz sat at the head of the table, his hands folded as if in prayer. Bill, Kyle began, his voice trembling but firm. We've looked at the Allah transactions. They're sham sales. We're soliciting money from retirees based on financial statements that are a fantasy. This has to stop. Krotz looked at Kyle with a profound, weary sadness, the look of a martyr being betrayed by his own. Kyle, your faith is weak. You are looking at the worldly numbers and failing to see the spiritual mission. If we tell the truth now, we destroy the foundation and thousands of people lose everything. Is that what you want? To be the one who kills the Lord's work because you couldn't see the big picture? The Lord's work doesn't need a lie to survive. Bill, Kyle countered. Kyle resigned that week. He thought that by leaving, he was washing his hands of the sin. He didn't realize that the machine he had helped uncover was about to grind thousands of lives into the dust. He had tried to sound the alarm, but the walls of the steeple were too thick. Chapter 4, The Sentinel of the Press. Terry Green Sterling was an investigative journalist for the Phoenix New-Times with a nose for too good to be true stories and a stubborn streak that went back to her childhood. When a source contacted her about the BFA, whispering about ghost companies and manufactured profits, she knew she had found something more than just a tip. She spent 6 months living in the basement of the Maricopa County Recorder's office. She pored over thousands of pages of property deeds, corporate filings, and tax records. She traced the money trail from the BFAS glossy, holy brochures to the desiccated scrubland of rural Arizona. She found that the profitable properties were actually desolate patches of dirt where the only thing growing was debt. In early 1998, her first article hit the stands, The Baptist Foundation's House of Cards. It was a devastating, clinical takedown of Krotz's empire. Bill Krotz responded not with facts, but with a holy war. He sent a letter to every one of the 11,000 investors. "We are under attack from Satan," he wrote, using the secular media to sow seeds of doubt and discord. "They hate us because we are successful for the kingdom. Stay the course. Trust the foundation." In the churches, the pastors, many of whom had received BFA loans for their own building projects, stuck to the pulpits. They didn't talk about negative net worth or circular cash flow. They talked about the persecution of the righteous. When Bill Anderson brought the New-Times article to his pastor, the man didn't even look at the evidence. "Bill, I know Brother Krotz. I've prayed with him. He's a man of God. Do you really want to trust a secular tabloid over a man who has dedicated his life to our convention? This is just the world trying to tear down what we've built." Bill Anderson went home and burned the newspaper in his backyard grill. He chose the prophet over the reporter. It was a choice that would haunt his final breaths. Chapter 5, The Day the Music Stopped. By 1999, the magnificent money machine was finally sputtering. The New-Times articles, combined with a tightening real estate market, had slowed the flow of new investments. And without a constant stream of fresh cash, a Ponzi scheme cannot survive. In August, the Arizona Corporation Commission and the Attorney General's office finally moved in. They issued a cease and desist order. The BFA was forbidden from selling any more investments. The check stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 months later, the Baptist Foundation of Arizona filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was the largest nonprofit bankruptcy in American history. The numbers were a nightmare. 11,000 investors owed $600 million. Actual liquid assets, barely $250 million. For Bill and Pat Anderson, The realization came on a Tuesday morning at the kitchen table. Bill was looking at their bank statement, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Pat, the interest didn't post. It's never been late before." They drove to the BFA office in Phoenix. They found the heavy glass doors locked. A crowd of elderly people was gathered on the sidewalk, some crying, some shouting, all of them clutching the same brochures that had promised them wise stewardship. "Everything's gone, Pat," Bill whispered, his voice sounding thin and old. "The school money, the retirement, everything we worked for." Bill Anderson, the man who had worked 40 years to ensure his wife's security, felt his heart literally break. He couldn't sleep. He spent his nights in the garage, carving wooden ornaments to sell for $20 apiece, a desperate and futile attempt to claw back a fraction of what had been stolen. 2 weeks later, he had his first heart attack. He died in the hospital, apologizing to Pat for being so foolish as to trust the church. Robert Shaw, the car salesman, lost his $250,000. At 70 years old, he found himself washing rental cars at the airport, his hands raw from the chemicals, his heart filled with a bitter, simmering anger. "I didn't just lose my money," Robert said. "I lost my church. I lost the feeling that there was anyone in this world you could actually trust." Chapter 6, The Giant in the Room. As the victims gathered in community centers, the question on everyone's lips was, how had Arthur Anderson, the gold standard of accounting, missed a $350 million hole in the books for over a decade? The state of Arizona alleged they hadn't missed it. They had ignored it. In 1997, a former BFA accountant had sent a road map of the fraud to Arthur Anderson's Phoenix office. They were also warned by D. Grebel, a local CPA who had verified that Allah was stone broke. "I called them 3 times, D. Grebel said. "I told them, withdraw your audit opinion. This company is a fraud. They never even called me back. They were collecting their fees and they didn't want the music to stop." In 2002, Arthur Anderson agreed to a $217 million settlement. For the victims, it meant eventually receiving about 70 cents on every dollar. But 70 cents couldn't bring back Bill Anderson. It couldn't restore the years of stress or the shattered peace of 11,000 families. The giant had paid a fine, but the damage was permanent. Chapter 7, The Final Judgment. September 2005. The courtroom in downtown Phoenix was a sea of gray hair. Hundreds of BFA victims packed the gallery, their eyes fixed on the 2 men sitting at the defense table, Bill Krotz and Tom Grabinski. It was the longest criminal trial in Arizona history. Over 10 months, the prosecution laid out a mountain of evidence, 1,000,000 pages of documents and testimony from whistleblowers like Kyle Tresh. This wasn't about greed in the traditional sense, the prosecutor argued in his closing. They weren't buying yachts. They were buying pride. Bill Krotz couldn't admit he had failed. He couldn't admit he wasn't the financial genius he claimed to be, so he chose to lie on the backs of the elderly and the faithful. The jury returned a verdict, guilty. Kratz was sentenced to 8 years, Grabinski to 6. As Kratz was led away in handcuffs, Pat Anderson watched him go, her face a mask of quiet, dignified grief. The magnificent money machine had finally ground to a halt, leaving only wreckage in its wake. Part 2, The Scalpel and the Silencer. Chapter 8, The Saint of Podiatry. Chicago in the winter is a city of sharp edges and biting winds. In the Edgewater community, the elderly moved with a slow, careful gait, their coats buttoned to their chins. For many of them, the highlight of their month was the arrival of Dr. Ronald Michaels. Michaels was a podiatrist of immense charm. He made house calls when no one else would. He brought cookies. He sat in the cramped living rooms of his patients and listened to their stories about the Great Depression and their long-departed spouses. He's a saint, one 80-year-old woman told her neighbor. He's the only person who visits me besides the mailman. But beneath the saintly exterior, Ronald Michaels was a man drowning. A messy divorce had stripped him of his home and his savings. He had developed a persistent problem with prescription painkillers and alcohol. He was living in a state of quiet, desperate panic. And then he discovered Medicare. To Michaels, Medicare wasn't a social safety net. It was an ATM with an infinite balance. He realized that his patients, elderly, often confused and deeply trusting, were the perfect conduits for a different kind of stewardship. He began to see them monthly. He would trim their toenails, chat about the weather, and then go back to his office to fill out the billing codes. But he didn't bill for toenail trimming. He billed for surgery. Between 1994 and 2001, Ronald Michaels became the highest paid podiatrist in the state of Illinois. Medicare paid him over $1.7 million. The bills he submitted were a work of dark fiction. He claimed to be performing complex foot surgery, sometimes 5 or 6 on the same patient in a single month. According to the records, one patient, Charles Labosco, had undergone over 300 surgeries. It's a medical impossibility. Dr. Donald Aronson, a consultant for the feds, would later say, if you had 350 surgeries on your feet, you wouldn't have feet. You'd be walking on your ankles. Michaels was banking on the fact that his patients would die of natural causes before anyone looked at the books. Until he met Joyce Brannon. Chapter 9, The One Who Stood Up. Joyce Brannon was not your typical victim. At 54, she was younger than most of Michael's patients, and she possessed a mind that was as sharp as a surgical needle. A former intensive care nurse, Joyce had spent 20 years in the high-stakes world of Chicago's hospitals. She knew what medicine looked like. She knew what recovery felt like. And she knew what a lie sounded like. She lived in the basement apartment of the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church, where she served as the caretaker It was a modest life, but one of deep integrity. In September 2001, federal agents Pete Tyler and Renee Reyes paid Joyce a visit. They had been tipped off by a single patient complaint and were now systematically checking Michael's billings. Miss Brannon, Agent Reyes said, sitting on Joyce's small sofa, "We're looking into the treatment you received from Dr. Michaels. According to Medicare, he performed 72 surgeries on your feet in the last 3 years." Joyce Brannon didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. She looked disgusted. "Funny, I was an ICU nurse for 20 years. I know what a surgery is. That man has never done anything to me but clip my nails and tell me I have nice arches. 72 surgeries? If he'd done 72 surgeries, I'd be in a wheelchair, not cleaning this church." Unlike Michael's other patients, Joyce wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't charmed by his cookies. She saw a man who was desecrating her profession. "I'll testify," she said. "You tell me when and where, and I'll be there. This is wrong. It's theft, and it's a betrayal of everything a doctor is supposed to be." She didn't know that by standing up, she was painting a target on her back that Ronald Michaels would see through the sights of a .22 caliber revolver. Chapter 10, The Sunday Execution. By late September 2001, Ronald Michaels was a cornered animal. Medicare had suspended his payments. His bank accounts were frozen. He was living in his car, the interior cluttered with empty bottles and discarded fast food wrappers. He was obsessively tracking the investigation. His Palm Pilot was filled with notes. He recorded the physical descriptions of the agents who visited his patients. And next to Joyce Brannon's name, he had written a single, ominous word, poor. He called her. He begged her to lie for him. "Joyce, please," Michaels pleaded. "I have a family. I have children. If you testify, I lose everything. You should have thought about your family before you did this." "Ronald," Joyce told him, "I'm an officer of the truth. I won't lie for you." Sunday, September 30th, 2001. The Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church was a place of peace. After the morning service, the congregation dispersed, leaving the building in a deep, sacred silence. Joyce Brannon went down to her basement apartment to rest. She was 3 days away from testifying before the federal grand jury. The killer didn't have to break in. He knew the church. He knew exactly where Joyce would be. He found her in her living room, sitting in her favorite chair, facing the window. She never saw him. He shot her 6 times. 5 shots to the body, and 1 point-blank execution shot to the back of the head. The weapon was a .22 caliber pistol, a quiet gun for a quiet church. When the pastor found her the next morning, the saintly doctor was already miles away, cleaning the shell casings out of his car, convinced that with Joyce gone, the truth was buried forever. He was wrong. Chapter 11, The Digital Trail and the Accidental Dial. The murder of Joyce Brannon transformed a white-collar fraud investigation into a high-stakes manhunt. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sean Berkowitz sat in his dimly lit office, staring at a yellow sticky note. Fatigue was a physical weight on his shoulders. In his exhaustion, his fingers slipped as he dialed a number. "Hello," a raspy, elderly voice answered. "Is this Charles Lebosco?" Berkowitz asked, realizing he dialed the wrong number from his witness list. "Who's this?" the man demanded. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lebosco. I inadvertently dialed your number," Berkowitz said, hanging up. He didn't think much of it until the FBI wiretap on Dr. Michael's phone began to hum. Within minutes, Lebosco had called Michael's. The terror in the old man's voice was palpable. "Ron, the feds just called me. They're on to us." The recording was the breakthrough they needed. It wasn't just fraud. It was a conspiracy. Lebosco was Michael's super patient, the one with 351 surgeries. The feds realized Michael's wasn't just billing, he was kicking back cash to Lebosco to keep him quiet. Chapter 12. The Hunter's Arsenal. The search for the point tattoo led the team to a police report from Skokie, Illinois. 3 weeks before the murder, Michael's girlfriend had called the police during a domestic dispute. She was terrified of the guns he was hiding in her storage unit. The police had confiscated 11 weapons, including a .22 caliber revolver, because Michael's license had expired. Tyler's heart raced as he saw the next entry in the log. On January 24th, just 3 days before Joyce Brannon was killed, Ronald Michaels had walked into the Skokie Police Department, showed his renewed license, and reclaimed every single one of his guns. He had the weapon. Chapter 13, the shell and the schedule. Inside Michael's car, investigators found a spent .22 shell casing tucked into the passenger seat. Next to it was a handwritten note, the address of the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church, with a detailed list of Sunday service times. Michaels had studied the church's schedule to ensure Joyce would be alone. The ballistics matched. The ammunition found in his trunk, a partially used box of .22 caliber bullets, shared the same physical characteristics as the rounds pulled from Joyce's body. The doctor who had billed millions was now a suspect in a cold-blooded execution. Chapter 14, the final reckoning. The trial of Dr. Ronald Michaels was a somber affair. The prosecution didn't just show charts and ledgers, they showed the humanity of Joyce Brannon. They played the wiretap tapes of Michaels coaching Lebosco, his voice dripping with manipulation. On May 5, 2005, the jury returned, guilty on all counts. For the Medicaid fraud, Michaels received 6.5 years. But for the murder of Joyce Brannon, the sentence was absolute death. Michaels was sent to the federal death row in Terre Haute, Indiana, a place of concrete and silence, far from the elderly patients who had once offered him sandwiches and tea. Chapter 15, the price of pride. In the years following the trial, the story of the Baptist Foundation of Arizona became a cautionary tale taught in business schools and seminaries alike. But for the survivors, the lessons were far more personal. Pat Anderson eventually moved out of the home she had shared with Bill. The rattling air conditioner and the empty garage were too much to bear. She donated the wooden ornaments to a local children's hospital, a final, quiet act of stewardship that had nothing to do with interest rates. Bill Krotz died in prison, a man forever convinced that his only crime was being a visionary in a world of skeptics. If they had just waited, he would tell his fellow inmates everyone would have been millionaires. He never understood that you cannot build a $1 million future on a foundation of stolen trust. Chapter 16, The Silence of Bethany. Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church struggled in the wake of the murder. The congregation felt a profound sense of violation. Their sanctuary had been used as a hunting ground. A small memorial was established in the church basement, not a plaque of bronze, but a small library of medical textbooks. It was dedicated to Joyce Brannon, the woman who knew the difference between a healing hand and a hidden scalpel. John Berkowitz, now a private attorney, often thought about that accidental phone call to Charles Labosco. He realized that in the pursuit of justice, sometimes the smallest slip of a finger can bring down the tallest of towers. Chapter 17, Shadows of Greed. The collapse of the BFA and the fall of Dr. Michos were more than just isolated crimes. They were reflections of a darker current in the American dream, the idea that success, if cloaked in enough piety or professionalism, can justify any means. For the investigators, the cases left permanent scars. Pete Tyler retired from the FBI shortly after the Michos sentencing, haunted by the thought of how many other saints might be lurking in the house calls he never checked. Renee Reyes continued her work, but she never again walked into a church basement without checking the exits. Greed doesn't always look like a man in a black mask, Renee told a class of new agents. Sometimes it looks like a doctor with a cookie, or a lawyer with a Bible. The most dangerous thieves are the ones you've already invited into your home. Chapter 18, The Long Road Home. Robert Shaw, the car salesman who had lost everything, never did return to the Southern Baptist fold. He found his way back to God in a different way, not through glossy brochures or high-yield promises, but through the simple, hard work of helping others find their footing after a fall. I still pray, Robert said, his voice gravelly from years of desert air. But I don't pray for money anymore. I pray for the strength to see things as they really are, not as I want them to be. In the desert, that's the only way to survive. Phoenix continued to grow. Its sky rises taller, its glass reflecting more and more of the blue sky. The desert mirage still shimmered on the horizon, promising water where there was only dust. But for those who had lived through the shadow of the steeple, the lesson was clear. The most important thing you can ever invest is your trust. And once that's gone, no amount of interest can ever pay you back. Chapter 19, The Anatomy of a Lie. As the years passed, researchers began to study the BFA case as a textbook example of affinity fraud. It was a crime that relied not on complex algorithms, but on the simple, devastating power of a shared identity. Bill Krotz hadn't just used the law, he had used the pulpit. He had understood that for many people, the fear of questioning a man of God was stronger than the fear of losing their savings. It's a form of spiritual abuse. One sociologist wrote, "When you tie financial prosperity to divine favor, any failure becomes a spiritual crisis. People stayed in not because they were greedy, but because they were afraid that pulling their money out would be a sign of a lack of faith." Krotz had exploited this perfectly. Every time the numbers failed to add up, he offered a prayer instead of a balance sheet. He had created an environment where doubt was synonymous with sin, and in that silence, the fraud had flourished like a weed in a garden of roses. Chapter 20, The Blue Screen of Guilt. In the federal prison at Terre Haute, Ronald Michels lived in a world defined by the blue light of the television in his cell and the heavy clang of iron. He spent his days drafting appeals that grew increasingly erratic, shifting the blame from himself to the government, to the church, and eventually to Joyce Brannon herself. She was the one who wouldn't listen. He wrote in one discarded draft, "I offered her a way out. I offered to take care of her, but she was stubborn. She wanted to be a hero." He never understood that Joyce Brannon hadn't wanted to be a hero. She had simply wanted to be honest. To a man whose entire life had become a series of scripts and manufactured personas, the concept of a truth that couldn't be negotiated was incomprehensible. As he sat on death row, the charm that had once secured him checks, and tea began to curdle. He became a ghost, a warning whispered between inmates about the doctor who forgot that his duty was to heal, not to hunt. Chapter 21, Fragments of Grace. In Scottsdale, every Sunday, Pat Anderson sat in the back row of a small, sun-drenched non-denominational church. She didn't listen to sermons about high-yield stewardship or financial blessings. She listened to the music, and she remembered Bill. She still had one of the Uncle Sam ornaments he had carved. It sat on her mantel, a reminder of a man who had been broken but had refused to stop working. She had found a way to forgive him for his foolishness, realizing that his only crime had been wanting to provide a world for her that was safer than the one that actually existed. Robert Shaw, too, found a quiet kind of grace. He spent his Saturdays volunteering at a local food bank, carrying boxes of canned goods for people who were in the same position he had once been. He didn't tell them he was a former car salesman or a victim of a $500 million fraud. He just told them his name was Robert and that things would get better. The dessert takes a lot, Robert said to a young man he was helping one afternoon. But it also leaves you with the essentials. If you've got your integrity and a bit of hope, you've got a foundation that no one can steal. Epilogue, the bedrock of truth. Joyce Brannon's legacy wasn't a $500 million endowment. It was the simple, terrifying courage to stand up and say, "This is a lie." She went out representing everything she believed in her profession, her church, her integrity. She did no harm. She only tried to do good. And in the end, that truth was the only thing that lasted. She was, and is, a hero. The towers of glass in Phoenix still reflect the sun, and the winter winds still howl through the streets of Chicago. The mirages remain, shimmering on the horizon, promising things they cannot deliver. But for those who know where to look, the truth is there not in the soaring promises of the prophets, but in the quiet, steady voices of those who refuse to be taken on faith alone. The end, the altar of avarice, a tale of two greeds. Prologue, the mirage. Phoenix, Arizona. In the mid-afternoon heat, the air doesn't just shimmer, it vibrates. It's a dry, relentless weight that makes the horizon blur into a liquid silver line. A mirage that promises water where there is only scorched sand. The desert is a place of extremes of absolute silence and sudden, violent storms. It is a place where men go to find God, and where others go to bury their secrets. For the faithful of the Southern Baptist Convention, this city was more than a desert outpost. It was a rising Zion. They looked at the cranes etching the skyline and saw the hand of God. They looked at the sprawling suburbs, neighborhoods carved out of the cactus, and Dustan saw a harvest of souls. And when they looked at Bill Kratz, they saw a prophet of the new prosperity, a man who spoke the language of the Bible and the ledger with equal fluency. But the thing about a mirage is that it only exists as long as you are far enough away to believe in it. Close up, it vanishes, leaving you with nothing but hot air and a mouthful of grit. And when the Baptist Foundation of Arizona finally vanished, it didn't just leave behind dust. It left behind broken lives, shattered spirits, and a question that would haunt the pews of every church in the valley. If you cannot trust the men of God, who is left to trust? Part I, the foundation of sand. Chapter 1, the visionary and the architect. 1982 was a year of beginnings. Bill Kratz stood at the window of his modest office, looking out at a city that felt like it was on the verge of exploding. He was 34 years old, an attorney with a razor-sharp mind and a heart that he claimed beat solely for the Southern Baptist Convention. Kratz wasn't a man of booming charisma. He didn't pace the stage like a televised evangelist, sweat-drenched and screaming for salvation. No, Bill was cool. He was professional. He wore suits that were well-pressed, but never flashy, and his glasses gave him the intellectual air of a man who spent more time with the Word than with the world. He understood that in a city like Phoenix, power didn't come from shouting. It came from the stroke of a pen and the promise of a return. When he took over the Baptist Foundation of Arizona BFA, it was a small, sleepy nonprofit. It raised a bit of money for missions, helped a few churches with their plumbing, and generally kept its head down. But Bill Kratz had a calling. He saw a financial empire where others saw charity. We aren't just here to survive. Tom, Kratz said to Thomas Grabinski, the man who would become his right hand, his legal shadow. Grabinski was the technician to Kratz's visionary man who could find the loophole in any contract and the grace in any debt. The Lord gave us the parable of the talents for a reason. Kratz continued. He doesn't want us to bury our gold in the backyard. He wants us to multiply it. Look at this city. Tom, people are moving here by the thousands. They need houses. They need shopping centers. They need places to spend